Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How's life on the opposite side of the studio window today, Ken?
Exceptionally well, delighted to be here, excited to be here, and it's great to welcome you to episode 172 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Rory and I have prepared 3 topics that we're going to be diving into today. We're going to start with our traditional student check-in, where we take something from the world of studying counselling, and we're going to be diving into timelines in therapy. I just want to put it out there that this is going to be really useful for qualified practitioners. It's really interesting work we're going to be covering in that timelines in therapy. Then we're going to be moving on to the Digital Counselling Revolution. That's where we recognize that technology is now playing a part in the way that counselling or psychotherapy is delivered and consumed. And we're going to be talking about taking payments online, so digital payments, as it were. And then our last section today is called Practice Matters. That's where we bring something from practice that our qualified practitioners may come across. And we're going to be speaking about what is trauma, and we've got a super duper lecture. It's an interview with Tracy Jarvis, where she's going to be digging into what trauma is. She's a real expert on that, so it's worth sticking around. A really packed episode. Kicking us off, student check-in. Rory, timelines in therapy, what are they?
Well, it's very interesting. Recently, or in the recent past, I had some therapy myself, and my therapist asked me to do some timelines. And I've done this time and time again in training, and I've assisted students working on their own timelines. I think what was very interesting this time was how the therapist actually handled the information. And before I go on to outline what timelines are and how very useful they are in therapy, this is a question that came up in our Facebook page. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, type Counselling Tutor into Facebook, and you'll find us. We're a closed group. Knock on the door. We're super friendly. Come on in and join the thousands and thousands of like-minded people in our Facebook group. Some are students. There's a smattering of qualified counsellors, quite a few qualified counsellors, supervisors and lecturers, all talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this topic came up. And a timeline is just asking a client to think about events that happened in their lives in the past. And I think it was Søren Kierkegaard who said that life has to be understood backwards but lived forwards. And by that, he was kind of making reference to the fact that the people we are today is generated and informed by what's happened to us in our past, which is why timelines are so good. So on a very simple level, you can just draw a horizontal line on a piece of paper and ask a client just to write down significant events, both positive and negative, that have happened to them through the arc of their lives to date. And once it's on paper, it can be quite a revealing document as people realize the amount of things that has happened to them and how that might have linked to why they're feeling like they are now. Now, just a word of warning about timelines. It seems like it's a really useful exercise, and it is. But if you're working with clients who've got really difficult trauma, you may want to think about whether you want to do a timeline. You don't want to be getting people to revisit their trauma and re-traumatize them. But for clients who are just wanting to understand a little bit of how they got to where they are, a timeline is mighty useful, Ken.
It is indeed. It can bring a lot of things up. It can kind of stimulate memories. So the actual, I guess, how to make it, you take your piece of paper, you're going to draw a line horizontally, as Rory said, in the middle of that piece of paper. And then the top part of that line, you put a plus sign. And on the bottom part of that line, you put a negative sign. So a plus and a minus, really. And then what you're asking the client to do is to place life events on the timeline in chronological order. So they're going to be linked to an age. So maybe at 10 years old, we moved house, and that was great for me. That was really amazing because we moved into a nice new area. Well, then you'd put in 10 on the line, and then that would go into the positive side, and they'll measure that from 1 to 10. 10 being quite intense, and 1 being, I guess, slightly less significant than 10. And so the positives would go on the top and the negatives will go on the bottom, and you draw them in little lines. And what that does, when that is now visual, the client can have a look at that, and they can actually see how their past maps out. And sometimes clients can be quite surprised at how many events there are that kind of pepper their lives when they take that time to have a think about it. The client in the here and now, having a look and seeing what age they went through that. And if it's an element of trauma, they might see the age they were then. And you can work with that because you're working with the adult that is in the room now, and you can work with how they might kind of speak to that child that experienced that back at that time. And you're looking for things like traumatic events, loss, change, times in hospital, whatever it is that the client can come up with. But you are looking for most positives and negatives. Sometimes we can see that there is a negative event that the client experiences that is really, really powerful for them. But it may have kind of brought about positive events further on because they went through that negative event. So you can see cause and effect on a timeline as well. So a really, really useful tool.
Yes, and one of the things that occurred to me doing this, because when my therapist produced a timeline, I thought, I've done these for years in my practice and in my training, and in fact in my early therapy. What was noticeable is my therapist was very skilled at asking the right questions, and it was the kind of questions she asked, particularly around. So looking at these events, Rory, how do you think that's informed how you view the world, and in fact other people? Because I will disclose that mine is around attachment, and it was very, very interesting that I hadn't considered it before. But actually, the early events in my life had actually formed my attachment pattern, and had reinforced it through the years. And one of the things that I had to go away with was actually I may just have to live with that. It may not be something that would be easily alterable. And I think sometimes in therapy we forget that clients may go away not being cured, inverted commas, but actually just having a real understanding of their process and how to manage it. It may not be something that they can totally overcome, but they can manage it, and they can live a life that has a lot of happiness in it and a lot of contentment. So it really is useful. And of course, it links in to TA. So it's fundamentally a psychoanalytical tool looking at the past, and it links into life scripts. So if you've studied TA at any level, you'll know that life scripts are our early decisions that we make in our childhood and early life that form who we are in adulthood. It's not something that's taught often in person-centered therapy, but it's a very, very useful tool. And I believe it can be used in a person-centered way because, as Søren Kierkegaard, who Rogers thought a lot of, he's one of Rogers' favourite philosophers, he believed that you had to look at life in the past before you could look at life in the here and now. So it's a very, very useful tool, but it has to be used with a lot of thought.
Indeed, it does. Speaking about that thought, it's something that you would bring in early in the session. So it's not something you'd like in the last 15 minutes of the session go, why don't we do these timelines? You want to bring it in early in the session. You want to give the client the opportunity to stop anytime they like. If you are working as a person-centered therapist, I think this has a place. And although in person-centered therapy, it's very unlikely you're going to get out a piece of paper and a pen with a client, but you can if you have the permission of the client. Because remember, in person-centered, we are client-led. So you might share that there is this exercise. Are you interested in us pursuing that? And if the client then says, yes, I'd like to look at that, it is their choice to do so. Similarly, when working with the timeline, if you're working in a person-centered way, you might do the timeline with the client and then say to the client, Is there anything here that stands out for you? Where would you like to start? Is there anything you'd like to dig into? So again, you can work in a really person-centered way, even though, as Rory, you've mentioned, it does have its roots in transaction analysis. You mentioned it can bring up very, very strong emotions. So giving the client the opportunity to stop at any time, giving them enough time at the end of the session after doing the exercise to ground and come back into the here and now and to check that that client is okay before they move on, I guess. A really useful tool. And we have a free handout that's kind of, Rory has created this. It's really good. It's in depth and it gives you a real good underlying overview. I don't know what I was trying to say. I was trying to say understanding and overview at the same time there, underlying. And really good overview of using timelines in therapy. And if you want to get a copy of that handout, it is free. You just go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. You're going to need to find our podcasts and you can find them in the top menu. Click on podcasts and go to episode 172 because that's today's episode. There you'll find all the show notes from today's discussion with any relevant links, but you'll also find a little button where you can click and you can download using timelines in therapy, that handout. And of course, if you are a member of our paid for resource, which is our counselling study resource, well, this handout is already present in the counselling study resource in the CSR. So if you are a member of CSR and you're a student using CSR to underpin and support you through your studies, then just log into CSR, do a search for timeline in the search box, and that will come up for you. And of course, if you're not a member of CSR and you're wondering what that is, you can get more information on that by visiting our website, counsellingtutor.com. All the info is there. So there you have it, timelines. And on our timeline today, we kind of move from our student check-in right into our digital counselling revolution. And today, we're going to be talking about taking payments online.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Well, what a great segue. I see what you did there with the timeline and moving into the next topic. Really, really good segue there. And we're going to talk a little bit about taking payments for online therapy. And the other day I was pottering around the kitchen and I looked at 2 coins and I thought to myself, I wonder what this is. Have we been abroad and had a couple of coins left from our trip abroad, and realised that actually there were £2 coins here in the UK. We have £2 coins. And the reason for my surprise was that since March and since the lockdown and the COVID epidemic, I've hardly ever used cash. I've used my card or paid online, and we're moving as a society, it would seem, to online payments. So how does this transpose into therapy? If you're working face to face, it's very possible that clients pay you in cash. However, more and more people are choosing to pay online, and there are lots of different payment gateways that you can use. And occasionally people are a little bit worried that if it goes directly into the bank account, someone in the bank may look at their bank statement and be able to identify the client. So there are some very, very creative ways, legal, I have to say, because everything has to be legal when you're dealing with money, of making sure that when you do charge the client, they can do it with relative anonymity. The thing is with the banking system is that no one's anonymous. You can't be sending anonymous money to people. The banks will pick it up, their fraud departments will pick it up. But you can do it in a way where the client feels that they have relative anonymity and it's sufficient. And of course, if you're in a paid role, you get paid. And there are quite a few mechanisms for that, aren't there, Ken?
There are indeed. They're called payment gateways, and all that basically mean is it's a little doorway that allows somebody to pay. What's wonderful is they can pay via your website. So we're speaking about the Digital Counselling Revolution. A website is a digital medium where you put your offer out of who you are and how you work, and you can take payment either pre or post session from your website. And I'm just going to give you 2 of the payment gateways that can be used for that. Now, I do have to put in here that it depends on where you are in the world. So the first one I'm going to say is PayPal. Now, PayPal has been around for many, many years, and it started off as the means of payment for anything that was bought or sold on eBay. And it was, of course, developed by our good friend, Mr. Elon Musk, back in the day. It's where he made his fortune in developing PayPal. But PayPal has grown. It split off from eBay, and it has grown significantly. And it is now, you can send invoices via PayPal. You can put little buttons on your site where people can click on that button and they can make a payment. You can maybe just get a web developer or somebody to help you put that on if you're not technically minded. But it is a rather simple process. And what I'd like to say here is it is secure. It is encrypted at, I think, 256-bit, if I'm not mistaken. So the details that your customers are placing within that form are secure. They're not seen by anybody, including by you. It will just go straight into your PayPal account. So you don't necessarily need to see their details. And they can pay you using their PayPal account, or they can use a credit card or a debit card through PayPal as well. So that is one way of taking a digital payment. And the other payment gateway that I will share, which gives you a little more flexibility, although it does come with some, added technical issues, challenges. I'm not going to use the word issues. Now, taking back issues, Rory, and putting in challenges.
Take that back.
No issues, only challenges here. And it's called Stripe, STRIPE. If you go online and you put that in, you will certainly find Stripe. They're an online payment gateway. They are amazing. And with Stripe, you will be working with credit and debit cards. It's very, very smart. It's little forms that you can put onto your website. And again, from Stripe, you can also send invoices post-therapy to collect payment. So there are just two of the gateways. We live in the age now where it's about ease of use. And as you quite rightly said, Rory, cash is getting less and less and less. As we look to the economy in general, it looks like the economy will be turning digital. Already, we kind of work in a digital way where you look at your bank account and what you see there are just numbers, and you can send that money to somebody else. It's digitally transferred. And this is just a way of taking digital currency from clients. And I guess it can take away that awkwardness. You can use it if you're doing face-to-face as well, the awkwardness of maybe coming to the end of the session. I'm not suggesting it's awkward for everybody, but some have shared in our Facebook group. You get to the end of the session, it's like, well, so can I have my money type thing? And it's easy for a client to forget because they've just been working with material. Maybe you take the payment up front. I'm not sure how you run your business, but it can kind of ease that flow. Maybe a client can buy a block of bookings. Maybe they can pay up front, or maybe you can invoice them afterwards, depending on how you choose to run your business. But I think it's worth considering. Don't be frightened of it. If you're thinking things like, I'm not good with technology, I don't really understand website stuff, it's okay. There are people can help. And if you go to either PayPal, the ones we've mentioned today, or Stripe, there's usually some really good, in fact, there are some really good help tips on their website that'll tell you exactly how to use their product.
Yes, absolutely. And it also saves you having a separate bank account. Some people may want to use their current account and not open another bank account up for their business. If you're paying money in for clients using backs, they pay your bank account. If you've got a shared bank account, people, your partner will be able to see who's paying in, and of course that's a confidentiality issue. If you pay via Stripe or PayPal, you can just transfer the money into your bank account and it says from PayPal. So it's just an added layer of confidentiality. And also, I think, in the age we live in, clients, people pay like this. This is how we pay. Think about when you're buying anything online, you're shopping, clothes, any kind of goods or services. It's usually all done through a payment gateway. So this isn't unusual for clients. And actually, I think gives a kind of gloss of professionalism.
Oh, yes.
It looks like you're a professional business. As opposed to, can you stick money in an envelope and post it to me?
Yeah. Very much so. And if you working face to face, already mentioned you can kind of use the methods we've discussed, but also wanted to share that both PayPal and Stripe also offer little handheld tiny weeny devices where you can where a person can use their credit card in your actual practice. They can pop their credit card in, and it links up to either your mobile phone's internet, or if you have a router, you can guide it through there. And it's just like the credit card machines that you find in a store, except it's a lot smaller. Takes a little bit longer to go through sometimes because you don't have the priority of queue that somebody massive like a big chain store would have. It can take a little while to go through, but the client can actually pop their card in. It's going to ask them for their PIN. They can put their PIN in. And again, everything is confidential. Their PIN is not stored on that device. You don't see it. It's encrypted and sent just to verify that they are indeed the card holder. So there's a lot of development that has happened. Again, depends on where you are in the world. I, for instance, know that PayPal is difficult to use in South Africa. I've heard. I don't know that from a first-hand perspective, but I have heard that. And then the other thing is there are many more other than Stripe and PayPal. We're only using these as examples. We are not promoting PayPal. We are not promoting Stripe. We're just using them as examples. I guess it's each individual practitioner's responsibility to research what is the right payment gateway for you, and just knowing that the keyword to search is payment gateway will really help you. If you go onto Google, put in payment gateway, you're likely to get a whole load of search results back that are relevant to what a payment gateway is and how you can use that.
Yeah, and one final thing, of course, is the advantage of using a payment gateway is that when you come to do your tax returns, if you're paying tax, you've got it all in one place. You don't have to separate out your personal spending from your business transactions. I use a separate account for my practice, and it's so easy. Come submitting my personal accounts, I can just send a copy of that in. It shows all the payments in, all the payments out, and it saves a huge amount of time.
There it is. We call it the Digital Counselling Revolution for good reason, don't we, Rory?
Absolutely. It is a total revolution.
It is. It's changing so much in the way that we work, and I think it's in service of our clients and ourselves. I mean, we cover taking online payments in our course, which is Online Telephone Counselling. It's a course that kind of shows qualified practitioners how to pivot from face-to-face to working online, and we answer so many of the questions and give a lot of guidance on how to work safely and ethically. And if you're interested in having a look at our online and telephone counselling course, go to counsellingtutor.com, and of course all the information is there. But we move away from Digital Counselling Revolution into what I'm really looking forward to, Rory. It's Practice Matters, and the reason I'm looking forward to it is because of that amazing guest that we have today.
Well, I caught up with Tracy Jarvis. We had a fab interview, and Tracy is a trauma specialist. There's huge amounts of discussion around trauma in counselling circles, and in this interview, we teased out what is and what is not trauma, and Tracy was very eloquent in explaining the difference between unsettling events in someone's life and someone who has traumatic events. She's an absolute expert when it comes to trauma. She's lectured all over the world on this, and we hope that she may produce some lectures for the Counsellor CPD resource, which is our CPD resource for qualified counsellors. But an amazing interview, so let's see what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Tracy Jarvis from PESI UK. Welcome, Tracy. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Really good to be here. Thanks, Rory.
Now, apart from being a director of PESI UK, you're a trauma specialist. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, how do you define trauma? What is trauma and what isn't trauma?
Well, Rory, I think that's a really, really good question, because the buzzword in our profession at the moment is everything is about trauma. But actually, there's trauma and there's things that trauma aren't. So, if we go right back to the beginning, Piaget said that trauma is failure for integrative capacity. And actually what he means is that when something happens, what happens in our brain is animal defenses get evoked to protect us. Now that is classed as trauma in terms of how the body responds, and what is evoked in the neurobiology of a person's system. So, for example, we can differentiate between relational trauma, where a parent or caregiver might be frightened or frightening. And in those experiences with a child, there are animal defenses evoked in the brain, which then can play out later in terms of mental health problems. But there are also other experiences, such as, parents that might bully, but it's not traumatic. There might be developmental wounding, which is not traumatic. And what I mean by not traumatic is some of these very primitive responses in the brain are not evoked, but there is an emotional wounding. So in counselling and psychotherapy, we want to be very, very clear that we're not just using trauma in terms of its buzzword, in terms of its use, but we're actually looking at, okay, this is trauma, and this might be sort of developmental injury or wounding, and making a very, very fine distinction between that with our clients as well as our colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really clear outline, Tracy, and I think that what I'm taking away from this already is that trauma per se is something that is biological. It sets a biological process off in the brain, which sets the limbic system, that middle brain, that emotional brain, into maybe fight, flight, freeze, or flop, as it's sometimes referred to. Whereas developmental wounding is more of an emotional hit. It's a more of a carried more emotionally. So I guess my next question is, how do we define that in clients when a client's in front of us? What's our clinical thinking around that?
Well, I think from a clinical thinking perspective, a clinician's really wanting to understand the whole of the person in front of them. Trauma, not trauma. So one of the questions actually which comes from Janina Fisher, which is such a great question to ask, is really not to kind of go into trauma, but is to ask a question somewhere in assessment. For example, like, was either one of your parents frightened or frightening? Which will say to us, what sort of responses have been evoked in actually not the mammalian brain, but more the reptilian brain, which is kind of like our really, really old part of the brain that evokes these kind of responses. So that is sort of one thing. But I know when I'm doing assessments and when a lot of my colleagues are doing assessments, we are looking at it clinically from, what might be trauma, but not wanting to go into too much detail, because going into too much detail just in the initial bit can actually further dysregulate and re-traumatize the client. So, there are many, many questions that when clinicians are doing assessments, you can get a sense of really what has happened to this person. And I want to take it back, pre-birth, having a look at the parents. Were they involved in a war? Were they immigrants? Did anything happen? Because that kind of tells us and gives us sort of quite a holistic picture around what's happened to this person, certainly in those developmental years, and then to look at things like, accidents, surgery, violence, domestic violence, any bereavement, sexual abuse, physical abuse, all that sort of thing, which can then inform us of, what is going on or what might be going on for this person in a number of ways on a dysregulation level, but then how that plays out in terms of why they have come into sort of therapy.
Yes, it sounds to me like getting a really good, you used the word holistic, a really good overview of the client's circumstances, I guess in some instances, the presenting past of the client, and then being able to see how that's affected them in the here and now. But also, I'm really glad you brought this up, it's about treading lightly, isn't it? Because as you say, you have to be very thoughtful that even people telling their stories can dysregulate somebody. So you need to be very, very thoughtful if you are using questions in assessment, that you don't cause more harm, basically.
Absolutely. And sometimes sort of less is more. And sometimes assessments can be really, really short, certainly in my practice, because I'm looking for parts of the personality. I don't know if anyone sort of is IFS trained or works with sort of sub-personalities, but always looking for either switches or parts of the personality, which say a lot to me in the initial meeting before I sort of develop my therapeutic idea of what might happen as we move into a therapeutic relationship. What might I see? What are some of the missing experiences, or what are some of the completing actions that still need to happen as we embark on a therapeutic journey together?
Yes, and I think it speaks to the work of Richard Erskine to some extent, and of course, the integrative style. I think a lot of people think integrative is using different modalities. Erskine would put forward, of course, that it's integrating the missing parts of self. And I'm really fascinated about subpersonalities. A lot of people who listen to the podcast are person-centered therapists. They may not be psychoanalytic or Gestalt therapists, but I think the subpersonality piece is interesting because it is in the lexicon of person-centered therapy. There are many voices inside the one. What would present in terms of a subpersonality that a therapist could see in the therapy room?
So if we think of sort of sub-personalities or parts or the selves inside, or actually, Rory, as you're saying, there are so many names. And I think, in the current sort of trauma treatment training, there are multiple jargons for pretty much the same thing that we're talking about. And as you were talking about that sort of integrative holistic view, it's about being able to sort of conceptualize different modalities while carrying out treatment and the depth process at the same time. So what I'm looking for when I'm working with people is, it can be really finely nuanced. It could be a movement in the hand when I say a certain word. It could be sort of a different tone of voice in terms of prosody. It could be, all of that combined with changes in skin color or eye dilation or activation that I see through tension or restlessness in the body. So really, when we're looking at parts, hearing that in terms of what people are saying, from the story right down to those beliefs, but also looking at the neurobiology. And what I mean by neurobiology is, how is this part of a person or what they're expressing showing up in the body, in their body? But it also gets a little bit more complicated than that. For people who are trained in either relational psychoanalysis or psychodynamic work, clients and therapists will be feeling also the transference or the counter-transference in the work. So, as you can see, we start to build the layers. Working with trauma, especially complex trauma that I work with, becomes absolutely fascinating, but also really interesting, because we're having to hold like a number of different plates to conceptualize actually what is going on for this person, and what kind of part of the unconscious process, the implicit experience, perhaps not yet showing the body, perhaps sort of more fragmented than actually what's being presented in the here and now. So in answer to your question, working with parts of the personality is a multi-layered, complex process of when one is training or treating trauma, because there are so many different things that you're having to hold as a therapist, and also then letting them unfold organically, or when the time is right, when the client is basically more stabilized, and that's a whole another podcast in itself. You can go for stabilization or non-stabilization, but bringing in some of these sort of interventions when the time is right, depending what's happening in the client's psyche as well as nervous system regarding regulation. It's
a huge area of research. It's a huge area of expertise. We were talking off air just a few moments before we recorded the podcast, and I've done a qualification in trauma-informed practice. It really opened up my eyes and also my ability to practice in a different form of way, taking on those aspects that you discussed. It's really fascinating. I think most therapists now, I'll say all therapists, really need to have some idea of working in a trauma-informed way and understanding what that is. It's a real pleasure to talk with you. I wish we could spend more time. I fear we could be here all day. Could I
say one more thing?
Of course.
Absolutely, one more. And I think, Rory, something that I didn't mention is that, when working with trauma or adversity, so stress or trauma, and knowing the distinction for therapists, it's really important that counsellors and psychotherapists or psychologists or whoever you are do their own personal work and understand their own internal parts of their system, their regulation, their unconscious processes, because by understanding that first, you can then bring that into the therapy session as somebody who sort of knows it in an embodied way, rather than just training in a specific modality in terms of trauma and then thinking you can practice. So just a word of encouragement from me. It's about first knowing the difference, trauma, adversity, dysregulation, own unconscious processes, having a great therapist and supervisor, and then taking that trauma training and treatment.
Absolutely. As they say, physician, heal thyself.
Absolutely.
Tracy Jarvis, it's been an absolutely pleasure to speak with you today. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rory.
A very big thank you to Tracy Jarvis and to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And of course, Tracy is also involved in PESI here in the United Kingdom, so well versed with CPD. She understands it. She knows what kind of ticks those boxes, and I think really informative. And we look forward to welcoming Tracy to add a lecture into our Counsellor CPD library. That's basically a library for our qualified practitioner friends out there, and it's there to, I guess, help us run and manage our practice, as well as sharpen our competence in the areas that actually matter. We try to pick lectures that actually make a difference in what we do. And if you're interested in finding out more information about the Counsellor CPD library, you can get information at counsellingtutor.com. That's where to visit.
Absolutely. And what an interesting mix of topics in our episode today. We started with timelines in therapy, looking at how to look at the presenting past to help clients understand where they are in the here and now. And in the Digital Counselling Revolution, we talked about taking payments. It's an essential part of someone who makes a living from counselling, being paid for their work. And we talked about different payment gateways and the advantages of embracing new technology to both make yourself more efficient and give the client a real choice. And then finally, we looked at trauma. What is trauma? What isn't trauma? A great interview with Tracy Jarvis, and looking at trauma and also really digging deep into how trauma affects people. Great episode. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and join the digital revolution.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.